Welcome to my storytelling channel. Today I bring you a moving narrative set on the frontiers of the Old West, a story of survival of the meeting between two worlds and of the human capacity to rise from the ashes. A Spanish woman and an Apache. Leader two souls marked by pain, who will discover that even in the most arid landscapes hope can flourish. Where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments. And if this story moves, you don't forget to subscribe and leave your like, so we can continue sharing these narratives that transport us to other times, but speak to us of eternal feelings. New Mexico winter of 1862. The cold bit like hungry wolves. Isabel Mendoza clutched against her chest the bundle of blankets where her three tiny newborns, Miguel Antonio and Esperanza, breathed with the fragility of small birds. Her bare feet left a faint crimson trail on the snow of the New Mexico desert. Behind her, several days' journey away, the family farm burned like a funeral pyre, consuming everything that had once been her life. The wind carried the scent of smoke, mixing with the blood emanating from her lacerated feet. Isabel breathed it in like someone absorbing a fading memory, wanting to retain something of what she had lost. War had come to her door like a thirsty beast wearing grey uniforms and Confederate flags. Don Francisco, her husband, had stayed behind defending the farm while she fled with the children. She didn't know if he was still alive, but the fire consuming the horizon at her back whispered a truth she didn't want to hear. Walk, Isabel. One more step, she told herself, as the winter desert stretched endlessly before her. 4 days wandering, guided only by the stars. Ramirez, the stable boy who had promised to accompany her, had disappeared during the second night, taking with him the small bag of provisions they had left. The betrayal hurt almost as much as the hunger. The sky, once immensely blue, began to darken. Heavy clouds dragged across the horizon like omens. Isabel contemplated the grey mantle that advanced, knowing what it meant. A winter storm in the desert could be as lethal as any weapon. The first flakes began to fall delicate as feathers, before transforming into a white gale that blurred any reference point. The world became a blank page where Isabel could barely make out her next step. Her legs finally gave way. She fell to her knees on the snow, hugging her little ones against her chest, trying to transmit to them what little warmth she had left. The cold began to seduce her with a strange sense of calm. It would be so easy to surrender, to close her eyes. No, she whispered with cracked lips as frozen tears furrowed her cheeks. Not while I still breathe. With heavy eyelids, she thought she saw a figure silhouetted against the whiteness of the storm, tall, motionless, observing her like a spectre. Was it death coming for her, or perhaps an angel sent to guide her to the other side? The figure approached, slowly. Through the curtain of snow, Isabel made out a severe face with copper skin and eyes as black and deep as a starless night. It wasn't an angel, nor was it death. It was an Apache. Darkness finally enveloped Isabel as her arms loosened around her babies, and her consciousness diluted like ink in water. The last thing she perceived were those unfathomable eyes studying her with a mixture of distrust and something else she couldn't interpret. Compassion, perhaps. Silence has its own language. Victorio, called Red Eagle by his people, had learned this since childhood when his father took him hunting. Listen to what doesn't sound, he'd tell him. And now, amid the storm, that silence was screaming. He had moved away from the camp to look for signs of intruders when he found that trail of blood on the snow. He followed it with the caution of one who knows that in the desert, any surprise is usually deadly. He didn't expect to find a Spanish woman, much less with 3 small creatures. Victorio stood before her as one contemplates a puzzle. His hand caressed the knife at his belt instinctively. A single movement, and he would end that woman's life, a silent revenge for everything the palefaces had taken from his people. For Lozan, his wife, whose face appeared in dreams whispering words he could never fully understand. For the little one who had barely known the world. But then one of the babies opened its eyes dark like his own, without fear, without prejudice. Just the pure gaze that hasn't yet known the evil of the world. Victorio moved his hand away from the knife. He made a decision that would forever change his destiny, one that many in his tribe would question. He bent down and collected the woman and her 3 little ones. "The wind brings lost spirits," he murmured in Apache as he carried that strange burden on his shoulders. The path back to camp was more difficult. The storm increased, and the weight of 4 lives made his steps slower. But Victorio advanced, with the determination of one who has made an irreversible decision. The first tents of the camp appeared like shadows in the gale. Surprised faces emerged to observe the chief, carrying a white woman and 3 creatures. No one said anything, but the look said everything: disbelief, rejection, even anger. Nakaida Klini, the old shaman, approached with a furrowed brow. "What do you bring to our camp, Red Eagle? Don't you recognize the face of the enemy?" Victorio held the elder's gaze without blinking. "I bring what the desert gave me. The Great Spirit placed this woman and her children in my path." "The whites bring death. Snow also brings death, but it gives us water in the spring," Victorio replied, continuing his way to his own tent. This decision caused a general murmur. Bringing strangers to the camp was already unusual, but giving them refuge in his own dwelling was a declaration these outsiders were under his personal protection. Inside the tent, Victorio carefully deposited Isabel on buffalo hides and placed the little ones next to her. He contemplated their sleeping faces, wondering what design of fate had crossed their paths. Outside, the storm and the murmurs increased. The chief knew he had defied his own people. What he didn't know was that unconscious woman with bleeding feet and 3 creatures clutching her chest would transform his world as inexorably as spring transforms the desert. The aroma of macerated herbs was the first thing Isabel noticed as she regained consciousness. An intense smell of damp earth tree bark and something more pungent that she couldn't identify. Her eyelids felt heavy, as if they were made of stone. She opened them slowly, disoriented, trying to understand where she was. A circular tent surrounded her, supported by polished wooden poles. Animal skins adorned the walls and covered the floor. Beside her, in small woven baskets, her 3 little ones slept, alive. A sob of relief escaped her dry throat. "They drink goat milk well," said a voice in a rough, barely comprehensible Spanish. Isabel startled. An elderly woman with a face wrinkled like tree bark was watching her from the tent entrance. Her knotty hands held a steaming bowl. "Who?" she tried to ask, but her voice came out as a croak. "Tlazolteotl," answered the old woman, indicating herself. "Healer. You white lady almost joined spirits. Feet very hurt." Isabel tried to sit, up to look at her feet, but a sharp pain forced her to lie down again. They were bandaged with strips of soft leather and a greenish paste that gave off that intense herb smell. "Where am I, my children?" "Small ones strong like wolf cubs," nodded Tlazolteotl, approaching to offer her the bowl. "Drink will give strength." The liquid had a bitter taste that made Isabel frown, but she drank it obediently. She needed to regain her strength, understand what had happened, plan what she would do next. "Who brought me here?" she asked after emptying the bowl. "Red Eagle, our chief," the old woman answered in a tone that mixed respect and something that seemed like concern. "Not all happy. You white people, we Apache, blood spilled between our peoples." Isabel lowered her gaze. She understood perfectly. The Apaches were considered ruthless savages on all Spanish farms. How many times had she heard stories of attacks, kidnappings, cruelties, and yet here she was being cared for by those who should be her enemies. A high-pitched cry interrupted her thoughts. Antonio, the smallest and most fragile of the 3, had awakened. Isabel tried to reach him, but the pain immobilized her again. Tlazolteotl approached the basket and picked up the baby with a surprising delicacy for her rough hands. She examined him with half-closed eyes. "This small one has shadow. In chest," she murmured, placing a hand on the baby's thorax. "Illness spirits circle him." Panic invaded Isabel. Was Antonio sick? Would her little one die after having survived so much? "Please," she begged, "help him. I'll do anything." The old woman looked at her for a long time, as if evaluating her. "Red Eagle will bring remedy. Root that grows in high mountains where snow not melt until summer." As if invoked by her words, the tent entrance darkened with an imposing silhouette. The man Isabel had seen before fainting entered with the silence of a shadow. His severe face seemed carved in ancient stone. Tlazolteotl spoke to him in Apache, quick gestures of her hands pointing to the baby. The chief's face remained impassive, but his eyes moved to Antonio and then to Isabel, a gaze so intense that she felt as if he could see through her skin to the bottom of her soul. Without a word, Victorio turned around and left the tent. "He goes to get medicine," explained Tlazolteotl. "Mountains dangerous in winter. Red Eagle. Risks much for small paleface." Isabel felt a knot in her throat. Why would this man risk his life for a Spanish baby son of those he considered enemies? The answer would not come with words. 3 days later, when Antonio's fever finally subsided, thanks to a potion prepared with the roots that Victorio had brought, Isabel understood that there were deeper languages than words, that of compassion, of respect, for life, of silent dignity. One night, while nursing her little ones, for miraculously her milk had returned, Victorio's figure appeared at the tent entrance. He didn't enter, simply observed. Isabel raised her eyes, and for the first time their gazes met without distrust. A mutual recognition silent as the snow falling outside. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded slightly. No more words were necessary. That night, while the 4 hearts he had saved slept under his roof, Victorio remained seated before the camp, fire watching the flames dance, as if they contained messages from the future, messages that he intuited would change the course of his existence forever. The first snowfall had given way to a dry cold that made the earth crack underfoot. Isabel had recovered enough to walk around the camp always with her 3 little ones wrapped in blankets woven by Tlazolteotl. She watched them flourish day by day, with the wonder of one witnessing a constant miracle, especially Antonio, who after his illness seemed to have gained unexpected strength. The tribe's attitude toward her remained divided. Some, like the old healer, had accepted her with cautious respect. Others kept their distance as if her presence was an offense. The children watched her with poorly disguised curiosity, sometimes following her like a flock of silent birds. Isabel learned. With patience she absorbed Apache words, customs, rhythms of life. She observed how the women tanned hides, how they prepared food, how they read the sky. She felt like a child again, discovering a world that had always existed parallel to hers, invisible until now. Victorio remained distant, but vigilant. Isabel felt his protective gaze, even when she couldn't see him, like a constant presence that watched over her safety without demanding anything in return. That morning, however, something had changed in the camp. An unusual nervousness hung in the air. Groups of people talked in low voices, casting glances at her. "Nadezhda returned," Tlazolteotl explained as she ground herbs in a stone mortar. "Strong woman, before chosen companion for Red Eagle." "His wife?" asked Isabel, feeling an unexpected pang in her chest. "Not as your people understand, chosen by council for him. Red Eagle never accepted union after losing Lozin. Nadezhda left with another tribe 2 winters ago. Now returns." Isabel nodded, processing this information. Something in her expression must have revealed her thoughts, because Tlazolteotl looked at her with half-closed eyes. "White lady must be careful. Nadezhda has serpent tongue and heart of firestone." She didn't have to wait long to verify the warning. That same afternoon, while collecting water from the half-frozen stream, a shadow projected over her. When she turned, she found herself before a tall, slender woman with black hair gathered in 2 braids adorned with bone beads. Her face of severe beauty showed features that seemed carved in dark amber. "So this is Red Eagle's white pet," she said in surprisingly fluent Spanish, almost without an accent. "They say he found you half dead in the snow. He should have let you finish dying there." Isabel rose slowly, holding the water skin against her chest like a shield. "My name is Isabel Mendoza," she replied with a calm she didn't feel. "And I'm grateful to your people for saving our lives. It's not my people who saved you, it's the whim of a man." Nadezhda spat the words as if they were poison. "A man who has become weak from loss, who has forgotten who our enemies are." "I am not your enemy," said Isabel, keeping her voice firm. "Nor of anyone here." Nadezhda smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "All whites are our enemies. They steal our land, kill our buffalo, poison our rivers, and now one of them sleeps in our chief's tent, weakening him with her presence when we need his strength the most." She took a step closer, invading Isabel's space. She smelled of pine smoke and bitter herbs. "The council will decide your fate tonight, Spanish woman, and I will make sure they understand the danger you represent." With that, she turned and walked, away with determined steps, leaving Isabel with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. That night, while the tribe gathered around the central fire, Isabel remained in Victorio's tent, cradling her little ones. She could hear the murmur of raised voices, occasional exclamations. They were deciding her fate. Tlazoltetl entered silently, her wrinkled face grimmer than usual. "Council divided," she informed. "Nadezhda asks for your expulsion. Says you will attract white soldiers, that you are a spy." "That's absurd," protested Isabel. "Why would I risk my children? Not all see with clear eyes when fear clouds heart. Your people caused much pain." Isabel lowered her gaze to her sleeping children. "What does Red Eagle say?" The old woman sketched an almost imperceptible smile. "He says, whoever questions his decision, questions his leadership. Says Sky placed you in his path and only Sky can decide when you go." A momentary relief ran through Isabel, but she knew this was just the beginning of a larger conflict. Nadezhda didn't seem to be a woman who easily accepted defeat. As if confirming her thoughts, the tent entrance opened violently. Nadezhda appeared, her figure silhouetted against the glow of the exterior fire. "The council has spoken, and you remain for now," she said in a controlled voice, but Isabel could feel the contained fury. "But I'll be watching you, Spanish woman. One suspicious move and you'll discover that Red Eagle's mercy is not shared by all of us." Victorio appeared behind her, his face as inscrutable as ever. He placed a hand on Nadezhda's shoulder in what seemed a pacifying gesture, but which also established hierarchy. "Enough," he said in Apache, but the tone made the message clear even to Isabel. "This is my tent and they are under my protection. The decision has been made." Nadezhda shook off Victorio's hand with an abrupt movement. She looked at Isabel, one last time, a look that promised this wasn't over, and left. When they were alone, a thick silence filled the tent. Isabel wanted to thank him, to ask him why he protected her, but something in the chief's posture, in the tension of his shoulders, made her keep silent. Finally, Victorio spoke without looking at her directly. "The snow will melt soon. The paths will open. Then you'll decide whether to stay or seek your people." It was the first time he had spoken directly about the future, about options. Isabel felt that something was changing between them, subtle as the first breath of spring. "Thank you," she replied simply, "for everything." Victorio nodded slightly and left the tent, leaving her with the feeling that something important had just been exchanged between them, something that neither had expressed in words. Spring came slowly to Apache territory, like a whisper that gradually turned into a song. Isabel watched fascinated as the world seemed to awaken from a long sleep. First small purple flowers breaking through the stones, then green buds on the stunted trees, finally the return of birds that painted the sky with their erratic flights. Her little ones grew with the same intensity as the nature around them. They were no longer the fragile newborns she had carried across the desert. Miguel, the most robust, was already trying to sit up by himself. Antonio, after overcoming his illness, observed everything with intensely curious eyes. And Esperanza, her little warrior, had a smile that could light up even the darkest tent. Isabel was learning the Apache language with a determination that surprised even Tlazolteotl. Each morning, while the little ones slept, she sat with the old woman to repeat words, phrases, to understand the music of that language so different from her own. "Your tongue bends well for Apache words," the healer commented one morning while teaching her the names of medicinal plants. "As if your spirit had spoken this language before." Isabel smiled, grateful for the compliment. She had purposed not to be a burden, not to be simply the white woman they tolerated. She wanted to understand, to belong, to contribute. During these months, she had learned to tan hides following the teachings of the older women, to recognize edible plants, to weave baskets with fibers that her fingers previously accustomed, only to find embroidery now handled with growing skill. The tribe's attitude toward her had gradually changed. The initial distrust had transformed into cautious acceptance. The children no longer hid to observe her. Now they approached, openly fascinated by her three little ones, who represented a curiosity in the camp. Only Nadezhda maintained her hostility, a threatening presence that Isabel felt even when she didn't see her. The woman had become the shadow of her days, watching her every move, whispering with other warriors when she passed nearby. One afternoon, while collecting herbs near the camp, Isabel found herself in a small clearing where the sun created a perfect circle of light. She had brought with her the only possession she retained from her previous life, a small silver medal of the Virgin of Carmel, which had been hidden in the lining of her dress. She contemplated it in her palm, the metal shining under the spring sun. She no longer felt for it what she once had. The faith of her childhood seemed as distant as the burning farm, as the life she had left behind. With a sudden decision, she began to dig a small hole in the damp earth. She placed the medal inside and carefully covered it. "I do not forget you," she whispered in Spanish, "but I must let go of what I was, to be able to be what I need to be now." A branch broke behind her. Isabel turned startled to find Victorio, who was watching her with an inscrutable expression. "Sorry," she said, rising hurriedly. "I shouldn't have strayed so far from camp." "What did you bury?" he asked, approaching. Isabel hesitated a moment. "A medal from my previous faith, the faith I was taught." Victorio observed the small mound of fresh earth. "Why bury it?" "Because I am no longer who I was," she replied with simplicity, "and I need to accept that." Something changed in the chief's expression, a flash of recognition, perhaps of respect. He approached her, and to her surprise offered her a small object wrapped in rabbit skin. "For you," he said simply. Isabel unwrapped the gift carefully. It was a knife with a carved bone handle, small but evidently well balanced. "It's beautiful," she murmured, running a finger along the edge, noting the intricate symbols carved on the handle. "Every Apache woman carries one," explained Victorio. "To cut plants to defend herself if necessary. The symbols are protection." Isabel understood the deep meaning of the gift. It wasn't a simple object, it was a recognition, an acceptance, perhaps even an invitation. "I will carry it with honor," she replied, fastening it to her belt as she had seen the women of the tribe do. They walked back to the camp in a complicit silence, different from the previous silences. Isabel felt that something fundamental had changed between them, as if they had crossed an invisible threshold. That night, while she laid her little ones down, Victorio entered the tent. Normally he withdrew when she was there, sleeping under the stars or in the council tent. This time, however, he sat before the small central fire, watching the flames with a meditative air. Isabel sat across from him on the other side of the fire. The dancing light created shadows and highlights on the man's angular face momentarily, softening his usual severity. "Why did you save us?" she finally asked, the question she had kept for months. Victorio remained silent for so long that Isabel thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice had a nuance she had never heard before: vulnerability. "I saw the little ones and remembered." He stopped as if the words were too painful. "Everyone deserves a chance to live, even the children of the enemy." "I am not your enemy," Isabel said softly. "I know," he replied, raising his eyes to meet hers across the flames. "Now I know." In that gaze, Isabel saw something that made her heart race, a recognition, a possibility, a future she hadn't dared imagine until now. Outside, the new moon hid its face, allowing the stars to shine with greater intensity over the silent camp, oblivious to the hearts that under the skins of the chief's tent began to beat in a new, unexpected but undeniable rhythm. Summer had arrived with all its intensity to Apache territory. The air vibrated with heat, creating mirages on the horizon that seemed like lakes of impossible water. Isabel had learned to move with the silent grace of Apache women, to find shade where there seemed to be none, to listen to the whisper of the earth that announced distant storms. Her little ones, now almost 8 months old, were beginning to show distinct personalities. Miguel was fearless, always trying to reach objects beyond his grasp. Antonio observed the world with contemplative eyes, like a little philosopher. And Esperanza, with her contagious laugh, had become the favorite of the camp's children. The relationship between Isabel and Victorio had evolved into an increasingly deep, mutual respect. There were no more personal conversations like that night by the fire, but the shared silences were loaded with meaning. Small gestures, a sustained look, an accidental brushing of hands when sharing food, the way he smiled when the little ones tried to reach him, were building an invisible bridge between two worlds that everything seemed destined to separate. Nadezhda observed this growing closeness with eyes increasingly darkened by anger and jealousy. Her influence in the tribe had diminished as Isabel was accepted, and this fed a resentment that grew like underground fire waiting for the moment to erupt. It was in this context that a stranger arrived at the camp. He introduced himself as Diego Torres, a deserter from the Confederate Army seeking refuge. He spoke a cultured Spanish and wore mestizo clothes, a peculiar mixture of military and frontier style. Isabel recognized him immediately, although he seemed not to remember her. He was Manuel Ortega, former suitor of her sister Lucia, rejected for not possessing fortune or surname. She had seen him a few times at social gatherings in Santa Fe, always on the margins, always observing with those calculating eyes. She decided not to reveal that she knew him. Something in his presence awakened in her an instinctive unease, a sense of danger she couldn't explain. Victorio, following Apache hospitality traditions, allowed the outsider to stay, but ordered him to be discreetly watched. "Trust your gut," Tlazolteotl had once told Isabel, and her gut told her that this man brought with him a veiled threat. One afternoon, while Isabel was gathering wild berries near the stream, Manuel appeared silently behind her. "What a surprise to find Mrs. Mendoza among savages," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The rumors of your death were evidently exaggerated." Isabel tensed, but maintained her composure. "Mr. Ortega, I see your memory is better than your manners." The man laughed, a dry sound like breaking twigs. "And I see your situation hasn't diminished your haughtiness. Tell me, do your hosts know who you really are? The wife of Colonel Mendoza, one of the farmers who seized the most land from the Apaches." Isabel paled. Her husband had never told her the details of how he had acquired his lands. She had always presumed they were family inheritance. "My husband was an honorable man," she replied, although a seed of doubt had been planted in her mind. "Your husband was a thief in uniform," Manuel replied with contempt. "And I wonder what your Apache lover would think if he knew he shares his tent with the widow of the man who ordered the Three Stones massacre." The blood froze in Isabel's veins. The Three Stones massacre, she had never heard of it. "You're lying," she whispered. "Ask him," Manuel challenged. "Ask about the Apache settlement that was razed 5 years ago, where the wife and daughter of your precious chief died." Isabel staggered, feeling as if the ground was opening beneath her feet. Could it be possible? Had Francisco been responsible for such an atrocity? Was this the reason why Victorio had lost his family? "What do you want from me?" she finally asked, regaining her composure. Manuel approached until he was just inches from her. His breath smelled of tobacco and something else sweetish, almost nauseating. "For now, your silence. I won't tell anyone who you really are, and you won't reveal that you know me. Consider it a mutual survival pact." Isabel looked him directly in the eyes, trying to understand his true intentions. "Why are you here? What do you seek among the Apaches?" Manuel smiled again, this time with a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Let's say I have my own agreements to fulfill, and my own debts to settle." With that, he withdrew among the bushes, leaving Isabel with a whirlwind of questions and fears. That night, while everyone slept, Isabel noticed Manuel slipping out of the camp. With the stealth she had learned from the Apache women, she followed him at a distance. She saw him stop in a small clearing lit by the moon, where he took from his clothes a small black leather notebook. In the silver light, he scribbled something in its pages, occasionally consulting a compass. Isabel realized with horror that he was recording the location of the camp, possibly routes, vulnerable points. He wasn't a deserter seeking refuge, he was a spy. She returned to the camp with her heart pounding in her chest. Should she alert Victorio? But how to explain that she had followed Manuel without revealing that she knew him? And worse yet, how to face the questions about her own past, about her husband? The lie by omission she had maintained, not revealing her complete identity, now felt like a crushing weight. She had begun to build something precious, fragile with these people. With Victorio, would it all crumble when the truth came to light? Manuel returned shortly after, discreetly putting away his notebook. As he passed by Victorio's tent where Isabel pretended to sleep, he paused momentarily. Through her half-open eyelashes, she saw the malicious smile that formed on his face. A cold certainty settled in her chest. This man was planning to betray the camp, and for some reason he wanted her to be part of that betrayal. Dawn found her, without having slept, torn between the fear of speaking and the fear of remaining silent, because both paths, she intuited, led to a loss she wasn't sure she could bear. The following days passed for Isabel as if she were walking on thin ice. Every step, every word could cause a crack that would break everything. She observed Manuel Ortega, or Diego Torres as he called himself, with disguised attention, noting his frequent absences, the way he studied the camp with calculating eyes, how he gained the trust of some warriors with exaggerated stories about his bravery against the soldiers. Victorio also watched him. Isabel recognized in his gaze the same distrust she felt. One afternoon, while the tribe prepared for a hunt, the chief approached her as she collected medicinal herbs for Tlazolteotl. "I don't trust the white man," he said without preamble. Isabel nodded, feeling a knot in her throat. She wanted to tell him everything that she knew Manuel, that she had seen him writing in his notebook, that she suspected a betrayal. But Manuel's words about her husband and the Three Stones massacre paralyzed her. What if it were true? How could Victorio continue to look at her with that mixture of respect and something deeper that had developed between them? "Neither do I," she finally answered. "There's something disturbing about him." Victorio studied, her intently as if seeking something more in her words. Then, surprising her, he took her hand briefly. "Prepare the little ones. We will leave for 3 days. Leave where to? To a safe place, a place that only my people know." He paused significantly. "And now you will know too." The implicit trust in those words made Isabel's heart tighten, with remorse for what she dared not confess. They left at dawn the next day. Isabel, with the 3 little ones tied to her back with blankets in the Apache way, followed Victorio on increasingly steep paths. They left behind the main camp, entering a mountainous territory where the pines became denser and the air colder and purer. Nadezhda had seen them leave with a look loaded with resentment. Manuel, curiously, was nowhere to be seen that morning. The path was demanding. They climbed rocky slopes, crossed streams of crystal-clear water, stopped briefly for Isabel to nurse the little ones. Victorio advanced with the certainty of one who knows every stone, every corner, but adapted to her pace, occasionally offering her a hand to overcome the most difficult stretches. By the evening of the second day, when the sun began to tinge the mountains with gold and crimson, they arrived at a narrow crevice between 2 vertical rock walls, just wide enough for a person to pass through. "Close your eyes," Victorio asked. Isabel looked at him with surprise, but obeyed. She felt his hand, gently guiding her through the passage, the brush of cold stone against her shoulders, the change in the sound of the wind. "Now open your eyes," his voice whispered close to her ear. As she opened them, Isabel held her breath. Before her stretched a small hidden valley, like a secret whispered by the mountains. A lake of turquoise waters reflected the sky, surrounded by majestic pines and wildflowers of impossible colors. A waterfall fed the lake from a vertiginous height, creating a perpetual rainbow where its spray met the light. "It's indescribable," she murmured, dazzled by the beauty. "It's our sacred place," explained Victorio, "where we come to listen to the spirits, renew our connection with the earth. Few outside our tribe know of it." Isabel understood the honor. He was doing her by bringing her here. The absolute trust this gesture represented. They descended to the shore of the lake, where Victorio had prepared a temporary shelter, a simple structure of branches and skins that would protect them during their stay. That night, while the little ones slept exhausted from the journey, Isabel and Victorio sat by a small fire, contemplating the reflection of the stars in the lake. The silence between them was comfortable, like a dialogue without words that both had learned to value. "My real name isn't Red Eagle," Victorio suddenly said, his voice barely audible above the distant song of the waterfall. "That's the name my people gave me when I became chief. My birth name is Naiche." "Naiche," repeated Isabel, savoring the sound. "What does it mean?" "The one who listens to the wind," he answered, looking at the lake. My father said that since childhood I had the gift of hearing what others couldn't hear. Isabel smiled. It suits you well. You seem to know things before they happen. Nietzsche looked at her then, and in his dark eyes shone a vulnerability he had never before shown her. I didn't know she was going to die, he said in a hoarse voice. I didn't hear the wind that day. Isabel felt her heart stop. It was the moment. She had both feared and longed for the revelation of Nietzsche's past, of the tragedy Manuel had mentioned. Your wife, she whispered. Nietzsche nodded, his gaze lost in the flames. Lausanne, and our newborn daughter. They were in the 3 Stones settlement when the soldiers attacked. Isabel closed her eyes, feeling the world falter. Manuel's words echoed in her mind. What would he think if he knew he shares his tent with the widow of the man who ordered the 3 Stones massacre? Who? She began to ask, her voice breaking. Who gave the order? A Spanish colonel, Francisco Mendoza, answered Nietzsche, the name leaving his lips like a curse. He ordered that no one be left alive because we supposedly hid deserters. Isabel felt the air leave her lungs. It was true, everything was true. Her husband, the man she had loved, with whom she had shared her life, had been responsible for the tragedy that had shattered the heart of the man before her. The words got stuck in her throat. How to confess it now? How to tell him that she was Isabel Mendoza, the wife of the man who had destroyed his life? Nietzsche looked at her, confused by her reaction. What's wrong? Isabel swallowed with difficulty, gathering all her courage. There is something I must tell you, she began, her voice barely a whisper. Something I should have told you long ago. But before she could continue, a sound interrupted the moment, Esperanza's cry, waking up hungry. The moment was lost. Isabel attended to her little one, her heart beating erratically. Nietzsche watched her, an indecipherable expression on his face. Later, when all the little ones were sleeping again, and the high moon silvered the valley, Isabel left the shelter. She found Nietzsche sitting at the edge of the lake, contemplating the still waters. She sat beside him in silence. The words she needed to say weighed like stones in her throat. The man who calls himself Diego Torres, she finally said. He is not who he claims to be. I knew him before in Santa Fe. His real name is Manuel Ortega. Nietzsche turned to her, his eyes shining with alert. Are you sure? Isabel nodded. He was a suitor of my sister. They rejected him for not having fortune or position, and she hesitated a moment. I saw him writing in a notebook. I think he's recording information about the camp. Nietzsche absorbed this information in silence. Then, surprising Isabel, he took her hand in his. Thank you for telling me this. It confirms my suspicions. Isabel felt that the contact of his skin burned her. How could she accept his hand, knowing what she still hadn't revealed? There's more, she began, but the words froze on her lips when Nietzsche brought his face close to hers. I can see it in your eyes, he said softly. Whatever it is you can. Tell me when you're ready. And then, with the gentleness of one who fears breaking something precious, he placed his lips on hers. The kiss was brief, just a brush, but in it Isabel felt everything they hadn't said, the mutual recognition of 2 wounded souls, the promise of a refuge, the possibility of a new beginning. When they separated, the words she had been about to pronounce had dissolved. Not out of cowardice, but because in that moment under the stars in that secret valley, she realized that she was no longer the woman she had been. She was no longer Isabel Mendoza, wife of the colonel. She was simply Isabel, a woman being reborn from the ashes of her previous life. The truth would have to wait. They had a more immediate enemy, a threat to face together. And in this moment, as Nietzsche embraced her under the starry sky, she knew they would face whatever came side by side. The return to the camp was silent, but charged with a new intimacy. Isabel felt the weight of her secret like a shadow, but also the warmth of Nietzsche's hand occasionally seeking hers as they descended the mountain paths. The looks they exchanged contained unspoken promises, a language without words that they had perfected during the months of coexistence. The little ones, oblivious to the complications of adults, babbled happily on Isabel's back, fascinated by the play of light and shadow that the sun created as it filtered through the pine branches. Miguel had even begun to babble sounds that resembled Apache words, which pulled rare smiles from Nietzsche, even in the midst of his usual gravity. The camp appeared before them at dusk on the third day, with the smoke from the fires rising in lazy spirals to the orange-tinted sky. But something wasn't right. Isabel felt it immediately, a tension in the air, an unusual silence, where there would normally be conversation and laughter. Geronimo, one of Nietzsche's most loyal warriors, came out to meet them. His normally impassive face showed signs of concern. "The stranger is gone," he informed without preamble. "Disappeared during the night. Nakaido Clini says he saw tracks of several horses near the eastern stream. They weren't ours." Nietzsche nodded gravely, confirming his suspicions. "Did anyone else disappear?" Geronimo briefly diverted his gaze to Isabel before answering. "Nadezhda is also gone." Shortly after, Dawn said she was going hunting. The news fell like a stone in Isabel's stomach. Nadezhda and Manuel together, that could only mean trouble. "Did you follow her?" asked Nietzsche, his voice controlled but with a dangerous edge. "I sent 2 trackers. They haven't returned yet." Nietzsche placed a hand on Isabel's shoulder. "Go with the little ones to the tent. Don't leave until I return." "What are you going to do?" she asked, feeling a pressure in her chest. "Find out what that man is planning," he answered simply, but his eyes conveyed more a promise of protection, a silent request for trust. Isabel nodded and headed to the tent, aware of the gazes that followed her. How many in the camp would suspect that she was involved somehow in Manuel's disappearance? How many would remember that she was a foreigner, a pale face in the tent while nursing the little ones? Her mind worked frantically. If Manuel had contacted soldiers, if he planned to guide them to the camp, the thought was too horrible to contemplate. All these months of peace, of adaptation, of growth, alongside these people who had welcomed her, all destroyed by the betrayal of a resentful man. And if Nadezhda was with him, what role did she play in this? Had her hatred for Isabel been so great? As to betray her own people, night fell over the camp. Tlazolteotl came to see her, bringing food and news. "Trackers returned," the old woman informed in her broken Spanish. "Saw white man talking with soldiers, many soldiers with grey flags." "Confederates," murmured Isabel, feeling her blood freeze in her veins. "And Nadezhda?" Tlazolteotl shook her head. "Not find her. Maybe other path, maybe hidden." "The healer," observed Isabel with half-closed eyes, evaluating her. "You know white man truth before he come here." Isabel nodded slowly. It made no sense to keep hiding this, at least. "Yes, he's Manuel Ortega. He was a rejected suitor of my sister." "Why not say before I was afraid?" Isabel confessed. "He threatened me, said he would reveal things about me, about my past." Tlazolteotl nodded, as if confirming something she already knew. "All have passed, daughter of desert. Important is what we do now." With those words, the old woman left her alone with her thoughts and the responsibility of a decision that could change everything. It wasn't long before Isabel made that decision. She settled the little ones deeply asleep in their baskets. She kissed each tiny forehead, breathing in their scent of milk and innocence. "I'll return," she promised in a whisper. She took the knife that Nietzsche had given her and fixed it firmly to her belt. Then, taking advantage of the darkness and the knowledge she had acquired during months of observation, she slipped out of the camp. She knew where to look. Manuel was a man of habits. During his stay, she had seen him frequent a small cave in the nearby vicinity where he apparently withdrew to pray. Isabel had always suspected that there he kept his notebook of annotations. The night was clear, illuminated by an almost full moon that silvered the desert landscape. Isabel advanced, like a shadow following instinct more than sight. The Apache teachings had integrated into her being more deeply than she had imagined. The entrance to the cave appeared before her, a dark mouth in the light-colored rock. There were no signs of human presence, but something told her she was in the right place. With caution, she entered the darkness. The cave wasn't deep, just a few meters before widening into a small natural chamber. In the faint moonlight that filtered in, Isabel made out a small camp blanket spread out, remains of a fire, a canteen. And on a flat rock, as if waiting for her, the black leather notebook. She took it with trembling hands and opened it. In the scarce light, She could make out rudimentary maps notes about camp routines, numbers of warriors' escape routes. "Looking for night reading, Mrs. Mendoza." Manuel's voice startled her. She turned to find him at the entrance of the cave, his silhouette cut against the night. "So it's true," said Isabel, regaining her composure. "You're betraying them, guiding the soldiers to them." Manuel laughed softly, entering the cave with calculated steps. "Betraying them implies that I was ever loyal to those savages. No, dear. I'm simply fulfilling my patriotic duty. The Confederates pay well for information about hostile camps." Isabel pressed the notebook against her chest. "I won't allow you to do it." "And how do you plan to stop me?" Manuel advanced another step. "The soldiers are already on their way. By noon tomorrow, your precious chief and his tribe will be history. Nietzsche knows you're a traitor. They'll be prepared." The use of the chief's real name seemed to surprise Manuel, who narrowed his eyes. "Well, well. Intimacy with the savage. That explains many things." His voice acquired a mocking tone. "I wonder if he would remain so interested if he knew who you really are. Have you told him that you're the widow of the man who massacred his family?" Isabel felt as if an icy fist crushed her heart. "It wasn't I who gave that order. I didn't know what my husband had done." "You think that matters to them?" Manuel let out a disdainful laugh. "You're a Mendoza. The Apache hatred for your surname is legendary." "I'm no longer that woman," Isabel replied firmly, "and I won't allow you to hurt these people." With a quick movement, she tucked the notebook in her tunic and unsheathed the Apache knife. Manuel narrowed his eyes, assessing the situation. "Don't be stupid, Isabel. You have nowhere to go. Even if you stop me, the soldiers will come, and when they know who you are, they'll escort you back to civilization, to your rightful place. My place is with my children, with the people who saved us when everything else was taken from us." Isabel began to move laterally, seeking access to the cave exit. Manuel, perceiving her intention, moved to block her path. "Put down that knife, Isabel. We can still reach an agreement. Imagine your children back in society, reclaiming your husband's properties, the status, everything you lost." For an instant, images of her previous life crossed Isabel's mind, the elegant salons, the silk dresses, the comforts she had once taken for granted. But they were immediately replaced by others, Nietzsche teaching Miguel to recognize footprints in the earth, Tlazolteotl singing ancient Apache lullabies to Esperanza Antonio, laughing while the tribe's children made faces to amuse him. "I didn't lose anything that really mattered," she answered with serene clarity. "Now step aside." Manuel shook his head, an expression of disappointment crossing his face. "You were always too stubborn for your own good, just like your sister." He lunged forward with surprising speed. Isabel dodged the attack, but felt a sharp pain in her arm. Manuel had drawn a razor she hadn't seen. Blood began to flow down, her forearm warm and thick. Isabel backed away, trying to maintain distance and assess her options. The exit remained blocked, and now she faced an armed man, evidently willing to hurt her. "I don't want to harm you, Isabel," said Manuel, though his eyes shone with a very different intention. "But I need that notebook, and I need your silence." He lunged again. This time, Isabel was prepared. She ducked under his extended arm and cut him in the side with the Apache knife. It wasn't deep, but enough to make Manuel let out a cry of surprise and pain. "Damn it!" he roared, pressing the wound with one hand while brandishing the razor with the other. "You've become as savage as they are." Isabel didn't respond. All her concentration was on finding an exit, on surviving to return to her little ones, to warn Nietzsche. The deadly dance continued in the confined space of the cave. Manuel, stronger but dulled by rage. Isabel, more agile but weakening from blood loss. A sound distracted her footsteps approaching from outside. Manuel seized the moment to lunge at her, knocking her down. The impact against the rocky ground knocked the air from her lungs. Manuel's razor was descending toward her when a whistle cut the air. The man staggered backward, an Apache arrow piercing his shoulder. In the cave entrance, silhouetted against the starry night, was the unmistakable figure of Nietzsche, another arrow already prepared in his bow. "Step away from her," he ordered, his voice colder than the winter wind. Manuel, holding his wounded shoulder, assessed his chances. The determination in the chief's eyes spoke of an inevitable fate if he disobeyed. Isabel took advantage of the distraction to stand up the notebook, still secure against her chest. "He has information about the camp," she explained, pointing to the object. "He guided Confederate soldiers. They plan to attack tomorrow." Nietzsche nodded without taking his eyes off Manuel. "I know. Geronimo found his trail, and Nadezhda." "Nadezhda is with him?" asked Isabel, surprised. "No," Nietzsche answered, a flash of pain crossing his face. "Nadezhda tried to stop him. We found her in the woods, wounded but alive. It was she who told us where to look." Isabel felt a pang of remorse for having misjudged the woman. She had assumed that her hatred would lead her to betray her people, when in reality she had risked her life to protect them. Manuel let out a bitter laugh. How touching, the great reunion of heroes. "But it's too late. The soldiers already have the location. They'll come at dawn with or without me." Nietzsche tensed the bow even more, his gaze implacable. "Then there's no reason to keep you alive." Isabel took a step forward, placing a hand on Nietzsche's arm. "Wait, we need him to know exactly how many they are, where they'll attack from." Manuel smiled maliciously. "I won't tell you anything. Kill me if you want. You'll only accelerate the fate of the entire tribe." Nietzsche lowered the bow slightly without relaxing the tension of the string. "It won't be necessary to kill you," he said with terrifying calm. "There are ancient ways to obtain the truth, ways that your civilized people would call savage." Something in his tone made Manuel visibly pale. Bravado left his face replaced by a primordial fear. "You can't torture me. I'm a citizen of the Confederacy." "Here," replied Nietzsche, "you are just a man who betrayed Apache hospitality, and that has only one punishment." Isabel watched the exchange, divided between the desire for justice and horror at what was being implied. Finally, she stepped forward, confronting Manuel. "Tell us what we need to know and we'll let you go. It's a better offer than we deserve." Manuel evaluated her with calculating eyes, looking for some indication of deception. Finally, pain and fear won out. 50 men, well armed. They'll attack at dawn from east and south simultaneously." He paused, hatred shining in his eyes. "But it doesn't matter what you do. You can't stop them." Nietzsche and Isabel exchanged a look. 50 soldiers against the camp. The odds were not favorable. "Take him to the camp," Nietzsche ordered two warriors who had remained silent in the shadows. "Let Nakaido Clini heal his wound, but watch him constantly." As the warriors led Manuel away, Nietzsche approached Isabel. With gentleness, he examined the wound on her arm. "It needs attention," he murmured, tearing a piece of his own tunic to improvise a bandage. "I'm fine," she replied, although the pain pulsed with each heartbeat. "Nietzsche, there's something I must tell you. Something about my past, about who I really am." He silenced her gently, placing a finger on her lips. "I know, Isabel. I've known for a long time." She looked at him, astonished. "How? The necklace you buried. It had a name engraved. Isabel Mendoza de Gutierrez." His eyes fixed on hers, unfathomable. "I know that surname better than my own name." Isabel felt her legs weaken. All these months he had known who she was, the wife of the man who had ordered the death of his family. "Why didn't you say anything? Why did you allow me to stay?" Nietzsche finished bandaging her arm before responding. When he did, his voice contained an emotion she had never heard before. "Because I saw in your eyes what I saw in mine after losing. Everything, the determination to survive, not just for yourself, but for those who depended on you," he paused. "And with time I saw something else, something I thought I would never feel again." Isabel felt tears spring forth, uncontrollable. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know what he had done. I never knew until Manuel told me." "I know," replied Nietzsche, framing her face with his hands. "The sins of the husband are not the wife's. I learned that watching you these months, seeing your kindness, your strength, your capacity to adapt and grow." He kissed her, then a kiss that sealed a pact between them. A new beginning, a truth finally shared. When they separated, reality reclaimed them again. "We must prepare," said Nietzsche, his expression returning to the chief's gravity. "If what Manuel says is true, we have few hours." Isabel nodded, a new determination shining in her eyes. "I'll be by your side," she promised. To the end. Together, they returned to the camp where the tribe was already preparing for the imminent battle. A battle that would decide not only their future, but that of all those they loved. And as they walked under the stars, Isabel understood that fate sometimes weaves patterns more complex and beautiful than we can imagine. Pain, loss, betrayal. Everything had led to this moment of clarity, of shared purpose. Whatever the outcome of the battle to come, she no longer carried the weight of the secret. She was at last completely free. Dawn found the Apache camp in full activity. It wasn't the usual bustle of daily life, but rather the disciplined preparation for an imminent battle. Warriors sharpened arrowheads, women prepared bandages and medicinal herbs, elders sang protection chants in low voices. Isabel, with her bandaged arm and the three little ones firmly tied to her back, watched as Nietzsche organized the defense. His face, normally serene, now showed the absolute concentration of the strategist. "We'll take the children, elders, and women to the hidden valley," he explained when she approached. "They'll be safe there while we face the soldiers." "What's the plan?" asked Isabel, trying to maintain calm despite the fear that tightened her stomach. Nietzsche pointed to the mountains that rose east of the camp. "The morning mist condenses in those canyons. We'll lure them there. In open terrain, their weapons give them an advantage. In the mist and rocks, we dominate." Isabel nodded, understanding the logic. Then, making a sudden decision, she took the little ones from her back and handed them to Tlazolteotl, who was nearby. "Take care of them, please. I must do something before—" Departing to the valley. The old woman looked at her curiously, but nodded, taking the three babies with the skill of one who has held generations in her arms. Isabel headed to the tent where they were keeping Manuel guarded. Two warriors stood guard at the entrance, allowing her to pass after a brief hesitation. The interior was dim. Manuel lay on skins, his shoulder bandaged and his hands tied. Seeing her enter, a twisted smile deformed his features. "The Apache princess comes to visit the prisoner," he mocked, though pain dulled his voice. "Come to gloat before your new friends are massacred." Isabel sat across from him, maintaining a prudent distance. "I come to understand," she replied simply. "Why, Manuel? Why so much hatred?" The man looked at her for a long time before answering. "Do you know what it is to be rejected for not being enough? To be looked at as if you were less than the dust under their shoes, just because your surname doesn't appear in colonial registers?" Isabel vaguely recalled the arrogance with which her family had treated Manuel when he courted Lucia, the way her father had dismissed him almost without disguising his disdain for the son of modest merchants. "I'm sorry if my family treated you unjustly," she said sincerely. "But that doesn't justify what you did." Manuel let out a bitter laugh. "I'm not seeking justification, Isabel. I seek compensation. The Confederates pay well for information about hostile camps, and the satisfaction of seeing the proud Mendozas fall is an additional bonus." Isabel shook her head, feeling a mixture of pity and revulsion. "You're mistaken if you think I care about the Mendoza name. I am no longer that woman." "Oh, but you are," he replied with malice. "No matter how much you play at being an Indian, how much you lie with the chief, you remain Isabel Mendoza. Your blood, your upbringing, your true world is with your own kind, not with these savages." Isabel looked at him fixedly, finally understanding the magnitude of the poison that lived in him. "You're wrong about something fundamental, Manuel. The true world is not what is given to us by birth, but what we choose with our heart." She stood up, looking at him with a mixture of compassion and firmness. "You will never be free as long as resentment consumes you, and I will not be consumed with you." With that, she turned and left the tent, feeling that she was shedding an invisible weight she had carried since she recognized Manuel in the camp. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten with the uncertain promise of dawn. Nietzsche was waiting for her, his face a mask of determination. "It's time," he said simply. Isabel nodded. She joined the caravan that would lead the non-combatants to the secret valley, collecting her little ones from Tlazolteotl's arms. Before departing, she searched with her gaze for Nadeshda. She found her sitting in front of her tent, too wounded to walk to the valley, but with enough strength to hold a bow if necessary. She approached cautiously, aware of the complex feelings that existed between them. "Thank you," she said simply, "for trying to stop Manuel." Nadezhda looked at her with eyes that had lost much of their previous hostility. "I didn't do it for you," she replied, but the tone lacked its usual venom. "I did it for my people." Isabel nodded, understanding. "Our people," she corrected gently. Something changed in Nadezhda's expression. It wasn't a smile, but the hardness softened momentarily. "Take good care of them," she said, nodding toward the little ones. "They are strong like their mother." It was the closest to acceptance that Isabel could hope for. She received it as the gift it was, and continued on her way. The expedition departed as the first lights of dawn tinged the sky a pale pink. From the summit of the first hill, Isabel turned to look at the camp one last time. She saw Nietzsche and his warriors preparing figures, silhouetted against the horizon, like symbols of an ancestral resistance. "Come back to me," she asked in silence. Then she turned and continued the path to the valley, where they would wait for the outcome of a battle that could change everything. The hours passed with unbearable slowness in the valley. Isabel tried to stay calm for the sake of the little ones and the other refugees, but her mind kept returning to the camp, imagining the confrontation, fearing the worst. Tlazolteotl, always perceptive, sat beside her as she nursed Antonio. "Your spirit is divided," observed the old woman. "Part here, part there." Isabel nodded, unable to deny it. "I fear for them, for him." The healer contemplated the lake for a moment before answering. "Red Eagle is wise warrior, knows mountains like knows his hand, and has strong reason to return." She looked significantly at Isabel and the little ones. "New family, healed heart." The words were a momentary balm, but the anxiety persisted like a restless animal in her chest. When the sun began to descend, the weight became unbearable. Against all advice, Isabel decided to return to the camp. She left the little ones in Tlazolteotl's care, and accompanied by a young warrior who had insisted on not letting her go alone, set out on the return journey. Darkness was beginning to fall when they sighted the camp. The silence was absolute disturbing. No fires were seen, no movement. "Something's not right," murmured the young warrior, tensing his bow. They advanced cautiously among the tents. The camp seemed deserted, but there were no signs of destruction. No bodies, no sign of battle. It was as if everyone had vanished. A noise drew their attention to the tent where they had kept Manuel prisoner. The entrance was torn, the guards absent. With her heart pounding in her chest, Isabel approached. The interior was empty. The ropes that had tied Manuel lay cut on the floor. "He escaped," she said, feeling a wave of panic. "We must find Nietzsche, warn him." An alarm cry from the young warrior interrupted her words. Turning, she saw Manuel, emerging from the shadows, razor in hand. His face showed the delirium of one who has surpassed the limits of reason. "No one's coming, princess," he spat, approaching with staggering steps. "Your chief and his savages are busy in an empty canyon. I left them a false trail they'll follow for hours." Isabel backed away, looking for the young warrior. She found him, fallen on the ground, a cut on his leg preventing him from standing. "Manuel, this is madness," she tried to reason. "You're wounded, you've lost blood. Let us help you." "Help me?" He laughed, a chilling sound in the silence of the camp. "The only thing I want from you, dear Isabel, is to see you suffer as I suffered, to see how you lose everything as I lost when your family humiliated me." He lunged forward with the razor. Isabel dodged the attack, aware that her agility was greater than that of a wounded man weakened by blood loss. "I don't want to hurt you, Manuel," she warned, unsheathing the Apache knife that Nietzsche had given her. "Too late for that," he replied, attacking again. The deadly dance continued among the deserted tents. Isabel avoided confronting him directly, seeking to tire him, gain time. She knew that in his state, Manuel couldn't maintain the pace for long. Indeed, his movements became slower, more imprecise. The wound in his shoulder had begun to bleed again, staining his shirt. "Surrender, Manuel," Isabel pleaded. "You can still survive this." "Live for what?" he roared, staggering. "To see you play happy family with that savage, to remember every day. How the Mendozas took everything from me." He made a last desperate thrust. Isabel dodged it easily, but tripped on a stone and fell on her back. Manuel threw himself on her, the razor descending toward her chest. The familiar whistle of an arrow cut the air. Manuel stopped abruptly, looking with disbelief at the arrow that pierced his hand, causing him to drop the razor. Nietzsche emerged from the shadows, another arrow already prepared in his bow. "Step away from her," he ordered, his voice cold as ice. Manuel, holding his wounded hand, backed away, staggering. "You're too late, savage," he spat. "The soldiers already know where your precious secret valley is. Revenge will come anyway." Nietzsche tensed the bow even more, his expression impenetrable. "You lie, as you have lied since you arrived." Manuel smiled a smile full of malice. "Ask your white woman about lies. Ask her why she never told you who she really was." "I already know," Nietzsche replied calmly. "And I forgave her just as she forgave me." Surprise momentarily erased the hatred from Manuel's face. "Forgave? Why would she have to forgive you?" Isabel, who had gotten to her feet, looked at Nietzsche with similar confusion. The chief lowered the bow slightly, his gaze fixed not on Manuel, but on Isabel. "Because I was the one who led the reprisal against the Spanish farms after 3 stones, he said in a broken voice. "We burned properties, possibly including yours, Isabel. In my pain, I sought revenge, perpetuating the cycle that had taken my family." Isabel felt the world stop for an instant. The burning farm, the desperate flight everything had been part of, a chain of pain and revenge that had begun with her husband's order. "I forgive you," she said simply, the words arising from the deepest part of her being. "As I hope you forgive me." Nietzsche nodded, a single tear sliding down his impassive face. Manuel watched the exchange with disbelief. "No, this can't end like this. You should hate each other, destroy each other." With an animal cry, he picked up the razor from the ground with his uninjured hand and lunged at Isabel. Nietzsche released the arrow without hesitation. Manuel fell to his knees, the arrow piercing his chest. His gaze met Isabel's one last time, mixing hatred and something else. Regret, perhaps. Then he collapsed motionless. Isabel approached the fallen body, a deep sadness replacing the fear, not for the death of an enemy, but for the tragedy of a life consumed by resentment. Nietzsche approached, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's over," he said softly. "The soldiers?" she asked, recalling Manuel's threats. "Defeated," Nietzsche answered. "They fell into our ambush in the canyons. Those who survived fled to the east. And our people. Some wounded, but all alive," he reassured her. "I was worried about you. When we returned to the camp and didn't find Manuel," Isabel nodded, understanding his fear. "I needed to know you were safe," she explained. "I couldn't stay in the valley without knowing." Nietzsche embraced her, then an embrace that contained relief, protection, and something deeper, a mutual understanding, born of forgiveness. "We should return," he finally said. "The others will return from the valley at dawn. There is much to rebuild." Isabel nodded, but before departing, she knelt beside Manuel's body. With gentleness, she closed his eyes. "May he find the peace he never found in life," she murmured. As she stood up, she saw that Nietzsche had picked up something from the ground, Manuel's black notebook. "What will we do with this?" she asked. Nietzsche contemplated it for a moment and then offered it to her. "It's your past too, you decide." Isabel took the notebook, feeling its symbolic weight. In it were recorded lies, distortions, the twisted vision of a man consumed by hatred, but also fragments of a truth that had remained hidden for too long. "I will read it," she decided, "and then we will burn it together, to close this chapter definitively." Nietzsche nodded, understanding the meaning of the gesture. Together, they began the path back to the chief's tent. Behind them, the first stars appeared in the sky, indifferent to the small tragedies and redemptions of the mortals under their eternal light. The following days passed in a state of tense vigilance. Although the Confederate soldiers had been defeated, no one in the camp doubted that they could return. More numerous, better prepared, with a thirst for revenge for the humiliation suffered. Isabel had read Manuel's notebook, absorbing its pages, full of hatred and distortions, with a mixture of horror and sadness. The image he painted of her and the Apaches was unrecognizable, filtered through the lens of his resentment. Upon finishing the reading, she felt a deep compassion for the man who had been so trapped in his own suffering that he had been unable to see the beauty and dignity of those around him. As they had agreed, she and Nietzsche burned the notebook together in a small private ceremony. As the pages turned to ashes, Isabel spoke words that spontaneously arose from her heart. "You no longer own anything, not even my memories." Nietzsche had nodded, understanding the deep meaning of that declaration, but the peace after the battle was brief. One morning, just a week after the ambush in the canyons, the scouts returned with alarming news. A much larger contingent of Confederate soldiers was approaching. This time they weren't just coming for information, they were coming for revenge. The tribal council met immediately. Isabel, now fully accepted as part of the tribe, was invited to participate. She sat next to Nietzsche, with Esperanza asleep against her chest while the elders and warriors debated the options. "We should flee to the north," suggested one of the elders. "Join with our Jicarilla brothers." "No," protested Geronimo. "This is our land. We won't abandon it out of fear of the palefaces." The discussion heated up. Some argued that the survival of the people was more important than territorial pride. Others insisted that yielding to the pressure of the invaders was the beginning of the end. Isabel watched in silence, absorbing the passion and anguish in each argument. Finally, when the discussion seemed to have reached a deadlock, Nietzsche stood up. Silence fell immediately. "I hear, my brothers and sisters, and I understand both the desire to protect our people and to defend our land." He began, his voice resonating with natural authority. "We don't have to choose between one and the other." Everyone looked at him expectantly. "The women, children, and elders will go to the sacred valley as we did before, but this time they will remain there longer with sufficient provisions for a month. The warriors will divide into 3 groups. One will remain hidden in the valley as a last line of defense. Another, led by Geronimo, will conduct distraction attacks on the plain. The third, which I will lead, will prepare a final trap in the Mist Gorge." A murmur ran through the assembly. The Mist Gorge was a narrow ravine between steep mountains, perpetually shrouded in mists due to a nearby waterfall. It was a place the Apaches knew like the palm of their hand, but which was disconcerting and dangerous for outsiders. "And if they discover us before the trap is ready?" asked one of the younger warriors. Nietzsche looked at Isabel, a silent communication passing between them. "They won't," he answered with confidence, "because we will give them exactly what they're looking for until it's too late for them." The plan developed in the following days with the precision of an ancient dance. The women, children, and elders departed for the secret valley, taking with them the essential elements of tribal life. The warriors prepared their weapons and strategies, divided into the 3 groups, according to Nietzsche's vision. Isabel found herself in a unique position. Although she would go to the valley with her little ones, Nietzsche had asked for her help in planning the strategy against the soldiers. Her knowledge of Spanish and Confederate military tactics, obtained during years of listening to discussions between her husband and other officers, proved invaluable. The night before the separation, while the 3 little ones slept in their baskets, Isabel and Nietzsche sat by the fire in their tent, reviewing the details of the plan one last time. "It will work," she affirmed, looking at the rudimentary map they had drawn on the beaten earth. "If the soldiers follow their usual protocols, they'll divide exactly as we predict." Nietzsche nodded, though concern didn't leave his eyes. "It's not the strategy that worries me," he confessed. "It's having to separate from you again." Isabel took his hand, feeling the roughness of the skin tanned by years of desert life. "We will reunite again," she replied with a certainty that arose from the deepest part of her being. "We have survived too much for this to separate us." Nietzsche looked at her with such intensity that Isabel felt as if he could see to the bottom of her soul. "Promise me something," he said, intertwining his fingers with hers. "If I don't return, if things go wrong, take the children north. The Jicarilla will receive you if you show them this." He took off a small green stone amulet he always wore around his neck, a symbol of his position as chief. Isabel shook her head, rejecting both the amulet and the possibility. "I don't need to promise that because you will return." But Nietzsche insisted, gently placing the amulet in her palm and closing her fingers around it. Promises anchor us to the future when the present seems uncertain. That night, under the protective mantle of stars that had witnessed countless human separations and reunions, they made love for the first time. A love made of silences and sustained gazes of caresses that healed old wounds of bodies that found in the other a long yearned for home. At dawn, Isabel departed for the secret valley with the little ones and the rest of the non-combatants. The farewell was brief, just a brushing of hands, a final exchange of glances that contained everything words couldn't express. The days in the valley passed in a state of anxious vigil. Isabel divided her time between caring for her children, now more active and curious, and watching the horizon for signs. Although Tlazolteotl tried to distract her with teachings about medicinal herbs and traditional songs, the worry didn't leave her. The first sign came on the 5th day, a column of black smoke rising on the eastern horizon. The first phase of Nietzsche's plan, Geronimo and his warriors had attacked the advanced camp of the Confederates, causing chaos to divide their forces. On the 7th day, the lookouts posted in the mountains surrounding the valley reported movement on the western paths. A group of Confederate soldiers was approaching, following the false trail that Nietzsche had deliberately left. It was the moment they had planned for. Isabel entrusted her little ones to Tlazolteotl's care and joined the group of warriors that Nakaidoklini led as the last line of defense. She had prepared for this moment. She wore her hair gathered in an Apache braid, wore light but resistant skins, and carried a small bow that Nietzsche had taught her to use during the previous months. "You shouldn't be here," protested the old shaman, when he saw her take position among the warriors. "Your place is with the little ones. My place is where I can protect them," she replied, with the calm determination she had learned from the Apache women. "And I know these men better than any of you. I know how they think, how they act." Nakaidoklini studied her with penetrating eyes before nodding briefly. He recognized the truth in her words. The soldiers fell into the trap exactly as they had predicted. Following the false trails, the main contingent entered the Mist Gorge while a smaller group separated to explore alternative routes approaching dangerously close to the valley. This secondary group, composed of about 15 men, advanced cautiously along the steep paths when the first arrow whistled through the air. Apache precision was legendary. 5 men fell before they could understand what was happening. The battle was brief but intense. Caught between rocky outcrops and invisible warriors, the soldiers lost the advantage of their firearms. Panic disorganized them, turning them into easy targets. Isabel, from her elevated position, watched the development of the confrontation with a mixture of horror and determination. She had vowed that she would only shoot if absolutely necessary, if any of the soldiers directly threatened access to the valley where her little ones took refuge. That moment came when a soldier separating from the main chaos discovered a narrow path that led to the valley. Isabel tensed her bow, aiming with the absolute concentration that Nietzsche had taught her. Time seemed to slow down as she held her breath. The arrow flew true, hitting the man in the shoulder. Not a fatal shot, but enough to knock him off his horse and alert the nearby warriors, who quickly subdued him. When the last soldier fell or fled, a thick silence descended over the mountains. Isabel felt a shudder run through her body, the sudden understanding that she had participated in a battle, that she had shot at another human being. But there was no time for reflections. An Apache rider appeared on the horizon, riding at full speed. Upon arriving before Nakaidoklini, he dismounted urgently. "The trap worked," he informed, breathing agitatedly. "The soldiers were ambushed in the gorge. Many fell, the rest flee in disorder. But—" He stopped, his gaze momentarily diverting to Isabel. "Red Eagle was wounded, a bullet in the shoulder. They're taking him to the healing cave." Isabel felt the ground sway beneath her feet. The fear she had kept at bay for days now flooded her like an overflowing river. "I must go," she said, her voice barely audible. Nakaidoklini nodded, understanding. "We'll go with you. The valley is safe now." The journey to the cave, situated between the valley and the main camp, was torture for Isabel. Each step seemed too slow, each minute an eternity. Thoughts agitated in her mind. How serious was the wound? Would there be infection? Would she arrive in time? When they finally reached the cave, the sun was beginning to set. tinting the mountains with a blood red that seemed to Isabel a sinister omen. Inside, illuminated by torches and small fires, Nietzsche lay on extended skins. His left shoulder was bandaged with herbs and leather strips, but blood had soaked the dressings. His face, usually serene, was contracted in an expression of pain. Isabel knelt beside him, taking his hand. Nietzsche's eyes opened slowly, recognizing her through the mist of pain. "I knew you would come," he whispered, a weak smile curving his dried lips. "Always," she replied, caressing his burning forehead. "I will always return to you." With the help of Tlazolteotl, who had arrived shortly after with hastily prepared medicines, Isabel cleaned and rebandaged the wound. The bullet had cleanly passed through the muscle without damaging bones or arteries, but blood loss and the risk of infection remained serious concerns. For 3 days and 3 nights, Isabel didn't leave his side. She changed herb compresses, administered medicinal infusions, murmured chants she had learned from Tlazolteotl. The little ones, brought to the refuge by the women of the tribe, crawled nearby, their occasional babbling drawing weak smiles from Nietzsche, even amid the fever. At the dawn of the 4th day, the fever finally subsided. Isabel, exhausted by the constant vigil, had fallen asleep, with her head resting on the edge of the skins where Nietzsche rested. She felt a gentle caress in her hair, and woke to find his eyes clear and lucid, looking at her with an intensity that made her heart race. "You came back," she whispered, emotion breaking her voice. "I had a promise to keep," he replied, his hand finding hers. That same afternoon, while Nietzsche slept, regaining strength, Isabel briefly left the cave to breathe fresh air. The world seemed transformed, the colors more vivid, the sounds sharper, the air sweeter. The acute awareness of having been on the verge of losing everything made each detail of life shine with renewed beauty. Contemplating the mountains that stretched to the horizon, Isabel smiled upon, noticing a small miracle. Miguel Antonio and Esperanza were taking their first tentative steps on the grass, supported by Apache women who encouraged them with soft words. 3 small lives advancing toward the future, oblivious to the storm that had just passed. The entire tribe had gathered to witness the moment, forming a protective circle around the children. Even the most stoic warriors smiled at the spectacle of new life, of renewed promise. Isabel understood then that the true victory wasn't in the battle won against the soldiers, but in these moments of shared life in the community that had formed around them in the future, that was being built step by step like the first tentative steps of her little ones on Apache land. Autumn had come to the mountains, painting the forests with golden and crimson hues. Nietzsche's wound had healed, well, although in the cold mornings he felt a dull pain that reminded him of how close he had come to death. The Confederates, after their defeat in the Mist Gorge, had not returned. The war in the east required all their attention, leaving a momentary respite to the peoples of the frontier. The Apache camp had returned to its usual routine, but something had subtly changed. Isabel, previously tolerated as the foreigner under the chief's protection, was now respected in her own right. Her participation in the defense of the valley, her tireless care of Nietzsche during his recovery, and the way she had integrated Apache customs without renouncing her own identity had earned her a place among them that went beyond simply being the white woman. Even Nadezhda, recovered from her wounds, had established with her a truce that was gradually transforming into something close to friendship. They shared knowledge. Isabel taught her to read in Spanish, using pieces of bark as improvised books, while Nadezhda perfected her bow-shooting technique. One afternoon, while Isabel was gathering late fruits with the little ones, who now ran with the inexhaustible energy of healthy children, Tlazolteotl sought her with a worried expression. "Warriors find something," she informed her in her broken Spanish. "Nietzsche wants you come." Intrigued and slightly alarmed, Isabel left the children in the care of one of the young women and followed the old woman to the council tent. There, Nietzsche was leaning over an object that Isabel immediately recognized: Manuel Ortega's black notebook. "I thought we had burned it," she said, feeling a chill run down her spine. "This is another one," explained Nietzsche, his expression grave. "They found it hidden in the cave where he hid. It seems he had 2 records." Isabel approached with caution. The notebook was similar to the previous one, but the content as she leafed through it seemed different. While the first notebook contained mainly maps and strategic data about the camp, this second volume was more personal, a diary of observations, thoughts, and plans. "I want to read it," she decided, taking the notebook with firm hands. "Alone." Nietzsche nodded, understanding. He withdrew along with the others, leaving her in the privacy of the council tent. Isabel sat by the central fire and began to read. The first pages contained disparaging observations about tribal life, disdainful comparisons between Apache customs and civilization. But as she progressed, the tone subtly changed. There were entries about her, about how Manuel had observed her adapt, learn, gain respect. Notes about the little ones growing strong, despite initial predictions that they wouldn't survive the savage environment. And surprisingly, increasingly conflicted reflections about his own mission. "I sometimes wonder what I'm really doing here," he wrote in one entry. "Is it justice I seek, or just petty revenge disguised as patriotism? Isabel seems at peace among these Indians more than I ever saw her in Santa Fe." But these momentary doubts were always followed by renewed declarations of hatred, as if Manuel constantly fought against any nascent empathy. The final entries, written shortly before his death, revealed a man consumed by bitterness, unable to accept that Isabel had found happiness where he saw only barbarism. "I would rather see her dead than converted into one of them," said the last entry. "If I can't save her, at least I'll make sure she doesn't continue this farce of a life. It's the only thing I owe to the memory of the family that rejected me." Isabel closed the notebook, feeling a mixture of pity, anger, and a strange compassion. Manuel had been so trapped in the labyrinth of his own grudge that he had been unable to see the beauty and dignity that surrounded him, unable to understand that life could flourish in unexpected terrains. She made a decision then. She picked up the notebook and left the tent, heading to the clearing where months ago she had buried her Medal of the Virgin, the place where she had begun to let go of what she no longer was. Nietzsche found her there, digging a small hole with her hands. "It's not necessary to bury it," he said softly, approaching. "We can burn it like the other one." Isabel shook her head. "I want to bury it here along with the last that remains of my previous life," she explained, "so that it finally rests. Him, and also the part of me that still felt guilty for having found happiness after so much loss." Nietzsche knelt beside her, helping her dig. When the hole was deep enough, Isabel placed the notebook inside it and began to cover it with earth. "You no longer own anything," she said aloud, like a conjuration. The same words she had pronounced when burning the first notebook. "Not even my memories." When they finished, Nietzsche placed a small flat stone on the mound of fresh earth. "In the tradition of my people, we place a stone on the graves of our enemies," he explained. "Not out of hatred, but to honor the lesson. They taught us even through conflict." Isabel nodded, understanding the wisdom of this gesture. Manuel, in his twisted way, had been part of her path, an unwitting catalyst in her transformation. "What did it say?" asked Nietzsche as they returned to the camp, the setting sun elongating their shadows on the reddened earth. Isabel reflected a moment before answering. "It spoke of a man who could not see beyond his own wounds, who preferred to destroy rather than heal." She paused. "It makes me value more the gift you gave me. That all of you gave me." "What gift?" he asked, genuinely curious. "The opportunity to begin again, to build something new from the ashes of what was lost." Nietzsche took her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. He didn't need words to express that he too had received that same gift. That night, while the little one slept and the new moon hid its face, leaving the stars to shine with greater intensity over the silent camp, Isabel felt something finally release within her. An invisible weight she had carried even without being conscious of it. The past would never completely disappear. It would continue to be part of who she was, of the decisions she had made, of the paths she had traveled, but it would no longer bind her, no longer cast its shadow over the future she was building. And as she fell asleep next to Nietzsche, lulled by his constant breathing and the soft murmur of the wind among the tents, Isabel knew she had found something that many seek all their lives without ever achieving the peace of one who has made peace with her history, and in doing so freed herself to write the rest of her life on her own terms. Winter had come again to the mountains of New Mexico, but for Isabel it was a different winter than the one of her arrival a year ago. She was no longer a solitary and desperate figure fighting against the storm, but an integral part of a community that had welcomed her, transformed her, and finally accepted her as one of their own. The little ones had reached their first year, celebrated with a traditional Apache ceremony, where each received a protective amulet created by Doclini. Miguel, always the most adventurous, already walked with surprising certainty and emitted recognizable words in both Apache and Spanish. Antonio, the thoughtful one, observed the world with contemplative eyes that reminded Isabel of his father, Francisco. And Esperanza, with her contagious laugh, had become the favorite of the entire camp, capable of drawing smiles even from the most stoic of warriors. The relationship between Isabel and Naiche had blossomed like one of those desert cacti that, after years of apparent inactivity, suddenly explode in flowers of almost painful beauty. There had been no formal declaration, no specific moment of transition. Simply with the naturalness of water, finding its course, they had gone from sharing a tent to sharing a life. One particularly cold morning, while Isabel wove by the fire with Esperanza asleep in her lap, Tlazolteotl entered the tent with a solemn expression. "Council gathers," she announced. "They call you." Isabel looked up surprised. Although she was no longer treated as a stranger, she was rarely summoned to the meetings of the tribal council, usually composed of elders and experienced warriors. "Has something happened?" she asked, an old fear momentarily resurging. Were there new threats? Soldiers approaching Tlazolteotl smiled enigmatically. "Go and find out. I will care for the small flower." Intrigued, Isabel gently left Esperanza in the old woman's arms and went out into the bright cold of the winter morning. The camp was unusually silent, as if holding its breath in anticipation. In the council tent, she found the elders gathered in a circle around the central fire. Naiche was among them, but not next to her as he usually did on the rare occasions when she attended the meetings. He remained with the others, his face as solemn as that of the elders. Doclini, the shaman, rose with the dignity of his many. "Winters, woman of the desert," he began, using the nickname they had given her. "The council has deliberated for many moons about your place among us." Isabel felt her heart accelerate. What did this mean? Could it be that after all this time, after all they had shared, they were still questioning her belonging? "When you arrived, you were a stranger, a paleface, whom fate or the spirits placed in our path," continued the elder. "Many doubted the wisdom of Red Eagle in bringing you among us." Nadeshda, seated among the council members, nodded slightly, a shadow of her former hostility briefly crossing her face. "But," proceeded Doclini, "you have proven to have the heart of an Apache. You learned our customs, our language. You fought alongside us when the threat fell upon us. You raised your little ones in our traditions without forgetting your own." He paused, his ancient eyes surveying the circle, as if seeking confirmation in each face. "The council has decided that you are no longer a foreigner among us. You are Apache by choice, by the path you have traveled, by the life you have built." Here, Isabel held her breath, feeling that something important was about to happen. "We offer you a name," declared the elder, "an Apache name that you will carry among us and that will pass to your children, a name that tells your story." Naiche then stood up, approaching her with a firm step. In his hands he carried a small clay container with reddish pigment. "Tayuna," he pronounced with a clear voice, "she who chooses life among the ruins, she who is reborn from the ashes like the fire eagle." With infinite delicacy, he traced a line with the pigment from Isabel's forehead to the tip of her nose, and then two parallel lines on her cheeks, the traditional marks of one who is fully accepted into the tribe. "Tuna," repeated Isabel, savoring the name, like one who tastes an unknown fruit and discovers its sweetness. "I accept it with honor." A murmur of approval ran through the circle. Even Nadeshda slightly inclined her head, a gesture that in her was equivalent to an ovation. "There is more," continued Doclini. "The council also recognizes what all already know, that you and Red Eagle have formed a union, a family." Isabel looked at Naiche, who was now at her side, his presence solid as the mountains that surrounded the camp. With this recognition, proceeded the elder. "Your children are officially children of the tribe under the protection of Red Eagle, as if they were of his blood." Isabel felt tears springing uncontrollably. Not only had they accepted her, but they had extended that acceptance to her little ones, ensuring them a place, an identity, a belonging. "There are not enough words," she finally said, her voice breaking with emotion. "My heart is so full that I fear it will burst." Nakaidoklini smiled, the wrinkles of his face deepening like canyons carved by centuries of rain. "We don't need your words, Tiuna. Your actions have spoken for you." That afternoon, as the winter sun descended early over the mountains, the tribe celebrated, not with the solemnity of a Western religious ceremony, but with the organic joy of life that renews itself. There were dances around the fire songs that narrated ancient stories, food shared with the generosity of those who know that true wealth lies in community bonds. Isabel, now Tiuna, watched her little ones passed from arm to arm, receiving caresses and coos in a language they now understood as naturally as Spanish. She saw Miguel trying to imitate the steps of the younger warriors, Antonio listening with hypnotic attention to the shaman's chants, Esperanza laughing while Nadezhda tickled her. And she knew with a certainty that reached to her bones that she had found what many seek throughout life, not just a place to call home, but a home that claimed her as its own. That night in the privacy of their tent, Naishe took her hands in his eyes as dark and deep as the first time she saw them, amid the snowstorm, shone with an inner light that Isabel had learned to recognize as love. "Tiuna," he whispered, as if tasting the new name on his lips. "It suits you well." "Really?" she asked, a last insecurity showing in her voice. "Am I not too different?" Naiche shook his head, a smile softening his normally severe features. "It's precisely your difference that makes you valuable. We don't seek for you to be identical to us, but to contribute your own color to the fabric of our tribe." He then showed her a blanket he had been weaving in secret. In it were interwoven traditional Apache designs with motifs that Isabel recognized from the Spanish embroidery her mother had taught her, a perfect fusion of two worlds, of two traditions, of two lives that had found a way to coexist in harmony. "Like this blanket," continued Naiche, "neither purely Apache nor purely Spanish. Something new, something unique, something beautiful precisely because it carries within it many stories." Isabel caressed the blanket, marveling at the tangible metaphor of what her life had become. "Now I understand why the council took so long to decide," she said finally. "Understanding the process. It wasn't just about accepting me, but about accepting this new way of being Apache, this interweaving." Naiche nodded, his eyes shining with approval for her understanding. "The true path is never rigid," he replied, citing an ancient Apache proverb. "It adapts to the terrain, finds passage between the rocks, but always leads to the right destination." That night, wrapped in the new blanket that symbolized their union, Tiuna and Naiche dreamed, not of the past which they had learned to honor without being trapped in it, not of distant and uncertain futures, but of the perfect present they had built against all odds from ruins and despair. A present patiently woven day by day, choice after choice, with the strong threads of compassion, mutual respect, adaptation, and finally love that grows like those desert plants, slowly with deep roots, capable of surviving the longest droughts, because they have learned to nourish themselves from the faintest dew. And as they slept, the little ones breathed peacefully in their baskets, lulled by the wind that whispered among the tents as if telling ancient stories. Stories of loss and finding, of destruction and reconstruction, of how sometimes in the most unexpected places, under the most adverse circumstances, life finds a way to be reborn, stronger and more beautiful, precisely because of the storms it has survived. The setting sun tinged the snowy peaks with copper and amber. Tiuna, seated before her tent, worked on a loom weaving a blanket, with the intricate designs that had come to be her distinctive mark, Apache patterns interwoven with Spanish motifs, creating a unique style that other women of the tribe had begun to imitate. Her hands, no longer as soft as before but more skilled, moved with the confidence of one who has repeated the same ritual countless times. 25 winters had passed since that stormy night, when Naiche found her half dead in the snow, with 3 newborn babies clutched to her chest. Time had left its mark on her silver threads among her black hairlines of expression around her, eyes and mouth, but it had also left other, less visible marks, the serenity of one who has reached an internal balance, the wisdom of one who has walked between different worlds and learned to value the best of each. "Mother, someone has arrived at the camp," announced a voice that still retained the sweetness of childhood, although its owner was now an adult woman. Tiuna looked up to find Esperanza. Of the 3, she was the one who looked most physically like her, but her character combined Naiche's temperance with a curiosity that was entirely her own. "Travelers?" she asked, interrupting her weaving. Life was more peaceful now. The Civil War had ended years ago, and the old conflicts between Apaches and settlers had evolved into a tense but mainly peaceful coexistence. However, visits remained. Rare. Naiche's camp had gained the reputation of being hospitable, but zealous of its independence. "A white woman," explained Esperanza, sitting beside her mother. "She comes with a mestizo guide. She says she's a writer and wants to know the stories of the frontier. Father is receiving her in the council tent." Tiuna smiled, imagining the scene. Naiche, now an older man, but still retaining the imposing dignity of his youth, receiving the visitor with the perfect mixture of courtesy and caution he had developed over the years. "I'll go in a moment," she said, giving the final touches to the pattern she was weaving. "Your brothers?" "Miguel returned from hunting when he heard about the visitors," replied Esperanza. "You know how he is always wanting to be in the middle. Kev, anything interesting?" "Antonio is in the cave of paintings, as always." Tiuna nodded, a flash of pride lighting her face as she thought of her adult children. Miguel had become one of the best hunters of the tribe, respected for his courage, but also for his generosity. Antonio, the silent one, had developed a deep interest in both Apache and European traditions, and knowledge, learning to read and write not only Spanish, but also English, thanks to books that occasionally arrived through traders. And Esperanza, her little warrior, had grown to become a bridge between cultures, learning the healing arts from Tlazolteotl, but also the medical techniques that white doctors from nearby settlements were willing to share. None was entirely Apache, nor entirely Spanish. They were something new, like the blanket she wove, a harmonious fusion that, instead of diminishing each heritage, enhanced them mutually. Tiuna put away her work and headed to the council tent. The camp bustled with the usual early evening activity: women preparing dinner, children playing the last races before night fell, elders exchanging stories by small fires. Upon entering the tent, she found Naiche conversing with a young woman of refined appearance. She wore practical travel clothes, but of good quality, and her posture revealed a formal education. Next to her, a man of mestizo features served as interpreter, although Tiuna noticed that the visitor seemed to understand quite a bit of the rudimentary Apache that Naiche used for outsiders. "Ah, here she is," said Naiche upon seeing her enter, switching to the fluent Spanish they had spoken in their home for decades. "The person you should really meet, Miss Parker." The woman turned, her eyes lighting up with genuine interest upon seeing Tiuna. "It's an honor to meet you," she said, extending her hand in the Western style. "I'm Elizabeth Parker from Boston. I'm compiling stories of the frontier, especially those that speak of encounters between cultures of survival in extreme circumstances." Tiuna took her hand, feeling a curious familiarity with this young woman, so different from her, and yet connected by some invisible thread she couldn't quite identify. "Welcome to our home," she replied with the serene dignity that years had given her. "What brings you specifically to our tribe?" Elizabeth extracted from her bag a worn notebook, its pages yellowed by time. "I found this among my grandfather's papers," she explained. "He was a Confederate soldier in New Mexico during the war. He wrote about a Spanish woman who had been welcomed by Apaches after losing everything, a woman named Isabel Mendoza, who had become the companion of the chief known as Red Eagle." Tiuna felt time fold upon itself. It had been years since anyone had called her Isabel. That name belonged to another life, to another woman. "An interesting story," she commented, maintaining her composure. "And you believe this woman is here?" Elizabeth looked at her intently, as if studying every line of her face. "I believe she could be sitting before me," she replied softly. My grandfather wrote that she had 3 newborn babies when they found her, that she was beautiful even in despair, that she had a dignity that didn't correspond with her situation. Naiche and Tiuna exchanged a look loaded with meaning. In all these years they had occasionally received curious travelers, attracted by rumors about the Spanish woman who lived among savages, but never someone with such specific information. Your grandfather asked Tiuna, a suspicion forming in her mind. Robert Parker. He was a sergeant in the 7th Confederate Cavalry, explained Elizabeth. He was one of the survivors of the ambush in the Mist Gorge. He wrote that defeat changed his perspective on many things, that he walked for days wounded until finding help, and in that time he began to question everything he thought he knew about Indians, about the war, about the purpose of his life. Tiuna vaguely recalled that name, not from the battle where she had not been present, but from later conversations with warriors who had participated. Your grandfather was a fortunate man, commented Naiche. Many did not survive that day. Elizabeth nodded, a shadow of recognition crossing her face, as she understood the implication she was sitting before the man who had planned and led that deadly ambush. He always said his real life began after that defeat, she continued, that it was like dying and being reborn. He left the army, returned east, studied law, and dedicated his life to defending the rights of indigenous peoples, although he was rarely heard. An unexpected smile curved Tiuna's lips. What strange paths fate traced, the man who had come to destroy. Them had ended up transformed by that very encounter, taking something of them with him, sowing seeds of understanding in distant lands. And you have followed his path in your own way, she observed. Elizabeth nodded. I want to tell these stories, not the ones that appear in official history books, but the real ones. Those that speak of how people from different worlds can find shared humanity even in impossible circumstances. There was a silence as Tiuna considered the implicit request. Should she share her story with this young woman? Turn her private life into a narrative for strangers? Naiche, as always attuned to her thoughts, spoke softly in Apache. Untold stories die with those who lived them. Shared ones live for generations. Tiuna nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his words. She turned to Elizabeth, who waited patiently, her pencil ready on the new notebook she had placed next to the old one. What exactly do you want to know? She asked. Elizabeth smiled, a flash of emotion in her eyes. Everything from the beginning. How you came here, how you survived, how you found a new home among those who should have been your enemies. Tiuna looked toward the tent entrance where the last rays of the sun created golden patterns on the beaten earth. In the distance she could hear the laughter of her grandchildren, playing the singing of the women preparing dinner, the constant and sure rhythm of a well-lived life. I am not what they say. She began, her voice acquiring the cadence of one who has told stories around the fire for decades, but neither am I what I was. And so, as the sun set on a world very different from the one she had known in her youth, Tiuna began to unwind the long thread of her life. Not as a confession nor as a legend, but as a testimony, the true account of how a woman lost in the storm had found against all odds not just survival, but fulfillment in the arms of one who should have been her enemy. Elizabeth wrote quickly, occasionally looking up to observe the interaction between the elderly couple. The way Naiche occasionally completed a phrase that Tiuna left unfinished. How their hands, worn by time but still strong, instinctively sought each other when the narrative touched particularly painful moments. The shared dignity they radiated like ancient trees that had grown so close that their roots and branches had intertwined until becoming indistinguishable. And she understood that she was witnessing something more valuable than a simple story of survival. She was seeing the living proof that human beings, when they dare to look beyond labels, prejudices, and fears, can find connections that transcend all barriers. The winter chill cut through the New Mexico mountains once more, with its familiar touch that Tiuna no longer feared. In her 76th year, she sat wrapped in one of her own woven blankets at the entrance to her home now, a small stone house built where their tent had once stood. The Apache camp had evolved over the decades. No longer a collection of temporary dwellings, it had grown into a permanent settlement, with gardens, corrals, and even a small school, where Esperanza taught the children both traditional knowledge and the education needed for the changing world beyond. Miguel, now a respected elder in his own right, had married a woman from another tribe and had 4 children, who had given him 9 grandchildren. Antonio had never married, preferring the life of a scholar and mystic traveling between settlements, as a keeper of both Apache traditions and the knowledge he'd gained from his extensive readings. And Esperanza, her fierce daughter, had become a healer whose fame spread beyond tribal boundaries, bringing both native and white patients, seeking her unique combination of traditional and modern medicine. Nietzsche had passed quietly in his sleep, 5 winters ago, a peaceful death that came after a long life well lived. Tiuna had mourned deeply, but not despairingly. Their bond, she knew, transcended physical presence. "Grandmother," called a young voice, interrupting her reverie. "There's a visitor asking for you." Tiuna looked up to see her great-granddaughter, a beautiful girl of 16, who carried Nietzsche's eyes in Isabel's face, a bridge across generations and cultures. "Who is it, little bird?" she asked, setting aside the small carving she had been working on. "An old white woman. She says she knows you. She has a book." Tiuna smiled, understanding immediately. With her great-granddaughter's help, she rose and made her way to the council house where visitors were received. There, seated by the fire, was Elizabeth Parker, no longer the young woman who had come seeking stories decades ago, but now an elder, herself with silver hair tied back in a neat bun, and eyes that still sparkled with curiosity and intelligence. "Tiuna," she said, rising with some difficulty, "I wasn't sure you would still be with us." "We desert plants are hard to kill," replied Tiuna with a smile, embracing the woman. "It's good to see you again, Elizabeth." They sat together, and Elizabeth presented her with a beautifully bound book. On its cover, embossed in gold, was the title, "Woman of the Desert, The Life of Tiuna." "It took longer than I expected," Elizabeth explained. "I wanted to get every detail right, and then it seemed to have a life of its own. It's been published in several languages now. Your story has traveled far." Tiuna ran her fingers over the book's smooth surface, a strange feeling stirring in her chest. Her life, her journey from Isabel to Tiuna, now captured in pages that would outlast her. "Did you include everything?" she asked. "Even the difficult parts," Elizabeth nodded. "Especially those. They're what made your story real, what makes readers understand the true meaning of transformation and forgiveness." For a long moment, Tiuna sat in silence, holding the physical manifestation of her life's journey. Then she passed it to her great-granddaughter. "Read it to me, little bird," she requested. "I want to hear my story through your voice." As the young girl began to read, Tiuna closed her eyes, seeing once more the snow-covered desert, feeling the weight of 3 newborn babies against her chest. Experiencing again the terror and desperation of that night that had changed everything. But now surrounded by the family that had grown from those 3 tiny lives in the home that had been built from nothing but hope and determination, she understood the full circle of her journey. She was Tiuna, woman of the desert, she who chooses life among the ruins, and her story would continue, carried forward in the blood and memories of generations yet to come, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and its capacity to find home in the most unexpected places. As the fire crackled and the sun began its descent behind the mountains, Tiuna listened to her own life unfold in her great-granddaughter's voice, a smile of deep contentment on her face. The woman she had been, the woman she had become, and now the legend she would leave behind, all parts of a wholer life not just survived but truly lived.